And I'm slowly realizing this is not going to work. I did not have whatever it was going to take, and I internalized that as me being weak, me being worthless, useless. I saw myself being a disappointment to you, Tara, to God, to your family.
In all the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are the reason I smile. Yeah.
This is Behind Our Smiles,
Pursuing connection,
and finding joy.
even in the struggle.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles Marriage Podcast. We are Joe and Tara Buchanan. We're so honored to be hanging out with you, and we're so glad you're here.
Yeah, we love being with you every week.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining in. And our favorite part of the podcast, we start off with featuring you and what makes you smile about your husband and wife. And every message is always amazing. Makes us smile when you share those things. So this week we're hearing from Elaine talking about her husband, Chris. And she says, what makes me smile is when I think about my husband is the fact that he lets me know that I am his ride or die. He has lived in a variety of places for work, and knowing that when we get together, we'll be riding or driving together. We've been married 27 years, supporting each other through thick and thin, and being his ride or die makes me smile. 27 years, it's just like us.
That's amazing, yeah.
And that idea, like, whatever we go through, we're going through it together.
That's right.
And I love that.
I'd love to know what makes you smile about your husband or wife, and you can share that with us. It's real simple. Just drop us an email, Tara, T-A-R-A, at behindoursmiles.com.
So in our 27 years of marriage, and then if we add in an extra 5 years of dating, we've had a lot of ride or die moments. Like this episode's kind of like that. We're going through something and kind of tested the water. So if you haven't listened to 173, We're Gonna Make It, you definitely want to listen to part 1. And we're kind of jumping in and finishing the story from last week.
Yeah, so this is We're Gonna Make It part 2. And I'm away at college, 8 hours away from Tara. It's cold. I'm lonely. I hate being alone. And triggering, a lot of things are triggering from my past, a lot of the trauma that I walked through. And I had finally gotten into a place in my life where I had Tara in my life who cared about me. Her family cared about me. I was in a good church family. I was really growing in my relationship with God. And I thought in order to hold all that together, in order to do what God wanted me to do, I had to go off to college. We thought maybe God was leading me to be a pastor.
Well, that's what we thought.
Called into ministry.
Pretty much for sure, yeah.
I really wanted to have my life used to impact people.
And you wanted like a career path.
Yeah, and I
like to
needed
know
a
that
career
you had a
path,
plan.
yeah.
Like this is a plan that will
Right.
work. Not necessarily a profitable plan, but hey, this is a plan. I mean, even for anyone going into ministry, it's not like so much like, oh, we're gonna make a lot of money, but hey, this is our plan, this is our calling, and let's go after it with everything we got. So we were only dating a year, but we knew this was it. Like there was still a seriousness here and going, okay, somehow we'll gonna get through these next 4 years
But
college together.
Yeah, and I think for me the tug of war going on, or the conflict inside me, was knowing that this very well could have been the decision that ruins all of that I end up alone in the end.
And so we're writing letters back and forth, and we read some letters last episode of kind of saying we're going to make it. We have all these challenges above, and me believing, I always believed in you. God's got a plan for your life. I believe this was it. I wanted to see you succeed. And I liked school too, so I wanted you to like school, and like school is awesome. And we're missing each other for sure. We're being apart. And again, without the modern conveniences of communication, we couldn't talk a ton. We wrote a lot of letters. And we did talk a little bit, but we don't have recordings of our conversations. But as I'm talking to you, I could tell in the tone of your voice that you were saying the right things. But there was a couple times I got off the phone with you and you were not as peppy and optimistic and spinning this is all going to be great as you led on to believe. And there's a little bit like, I remember those couple phone calls and I'm like, oh, I don't like the way he sounds. Like, I'm trying to be all, this is going to be so great and tell me all the good news. Tell me more about the phone you bought with the answer machine built in. And instead I can hear in your voice, like, he doesn't sound so well. And I didn't always know how to handle that, but there was a lot more going on than just, I guess here's the catch. there was a lot more going on than just I miss my girlfriend.
Oh, yeah.
It sounded like, oh, you went away to college, you miss your girlfriend. And I would just miss my boyfriend. That's all it was on my end. I missed you. But on your end, it was like way more than that.
Mm-hmm. I think I miss my girlfriend is a great, easy way to put a label on it at the time. Say, yeah, I just miss my girlfriend, especially if I didn't want to deal with the things that I was dealing with. But in reality, every moment that I was walking forward, I was losing more and more hope. I was losing more and more hope that I would amount to anything in the future, because I'm like, if I can't even do this, how in the world are we going to make this work? And I didn't want to put that weight on you. It's just the weight was getting heavier and heavier. There was a darkness that was creeping in, and all the things that I had walked through and the trauma of my childhood, every time someone left, those feelings were coming back to the surface. That angst and just, I don't know how to, brokenheartedness, right? Of being rejected and all of that was coming back to the surface. And so here I am trying, number one, I'm not a good reader, right? I'm blind in one eye. And so it makes it difficult to read, but I'm trying to read these textbooks. I'm trying to gain the information to do well in these classes. I'm trying to listen to the professors. I'm trying to say, okay, God, I'm chasing you. I want to make this work. And I'm slowly realizing this is not going to work. I did not have whatever it was going to take. And I internalized that as me being weak, me being worthless, useless. I saw myself being a disappointment to you, Tara, to God, to your family, to those that had believed in me. I mean, you threw a party for me to go off to college. And I think as I began to move forward, minute by minute, the weight was getting heavier and heavier.
It wasn't just sadness or loneliness, but that really triggering. I remember you saying even just the nightmares that you struggled with were coming on in full force.
I had struggled with nightmares throughout my life because of some of the horrific things that happened in my childhood. And I think in that season, they were relentless. Those nightmares were absolutely relentless. And I had nobody. I didn't have anybody that I could go talk to about it. And so I was carrying this thinking, I'm not close enough to God. I must not be good enough in my relationship with God, because why I should be able to give this over to God. I should be able to do this. And part of the problem is I was at a Christian college, and some of the teaching was basically, if you're close to God, then you should not have to carry these things. And so I really thought something was really, number one, I knew something was wrong with me. Number one. Number two, it was just all of those things that I had been told throughout my childhood. You're worthless. You'll never amount to anything. You're a piece of what, all of that stuff was just mounting to the surface. And it was relentless. And so at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I can't quit because it's over if I quit. So if I can just take one more step with this weight, then maybe then, hope will be found. But I think the darkness was just getting so intense.
Well, like you mentioned, I think these are things we didn't, like now 27 years later and our podcast, we understand better these things and trauma and whatnot. But even your history of foster care and moving homes. And again, there was a sense of home that you had in our previous city, even living with friends, that there was a sense of like, I belong here. But to suddenly, again, have to move.
That, right.
But also you never felt comfortable in your dorm.
No.
And dorms aren't always necessarily super homey. I mean, nowadays they are, but certain colleges, like they don't always, especially the guys' dorms, like hominess to feel. Did you ever feel at home, in your dorm?
And part of my story, again, the Unfolding podcast, episode 1, you can hear more of the story. I don't want to unpack that here. But part of my story is some incredible trauma in a facility that was very similar to the dorm that I was in. And so when I say relentless, I mean, I could barely breathe at times. It was so painful walking through that and having to deal with that and just trying to get one step again in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. And And so, yeah, I think the dorms in and of themselves were extremely triggering. And there were many nights that I woke up thinking I was in that other facility and just taking a minute to acclimate, but waking up from nightmares, the smell, everywhere I turned around, there was this trick. And I didn't know how to put I'm sounding dramatic, but I didn't know how to put a label on it or put a finger on it or to say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. I wasn't through my healing enough to understand the triggering that was happening was very normal. Number one, I mean, this is what happens, but I didn't have anybody that I could really walk through that with. And I didn't know how to say to you, Tara, you're the only real person I'm talking to. I mean, real person. You're the only person I'm talking to from back home, but I didn't know I couldn't put that weight on you. And I didn't know how to vocalize or verbalize or bring into words what I was experiencing.
And you didn't want to disappoint me.
Right.
Like, by the way, this is all horrible. Right? You want to get those letters back by going, hey, guess what? Again, I bought a new phone at the mall. Like, that's the kind of fun news to say how things are going at college, not I'm having trouble breathing.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble getting through each day. So this is barely starting to come in through our phone calls, little bit, the 1 or 2 phone calls we had, not really aware, again, maybe 10% aware of how you're doing. But again, wanting so bad for just to work out. Like, okay, we're going to make it. I don't care how hard it's going to be. We're going to make it. And originally you had planned to come in 3 or 4 weeks later, but then you had a friend coming down to our same city and said, guess what? I can come home and visit you. You've been gone for like all of a
2
week.
weeks, maybe.
Not barely. But I was like, yes, you're coming down to visit, And again,
because the original plan, I
girlfriend.
wasn't coming home till Christmas.
Yeah.
Was the original plan, and I think, or Thanksgiving, whatever,
or something like that. Yeah.
But because we couldn't afford it, we really couldn't afford
it. You didn't have your car with you,
right? I didn't have a way to make
rides
that.
And.
But I did, yeah. So I had a friend, or I had someone in college who was coming back. Yeah, friend coming back through, and so I was able to jump a ride, and I said, "Hey, I'm coming." And I think when I learned of that, I was like, "There, unless this friend is no longer going, there's no way I'm not getting on that ride. I'm going.
Yeah.
I just need a place where I can catch my breath and be okay." And I had no intention of sharing any of the hardship.
It was just, I want to see, give a hug
Yes.
from my girlfriend and get a break from all the.
Well, and part of the plan was to go to youth group church.
On
So I
Friday
wanted to
night.
be back in church. I was going to go to church Sunday morning, and then I would be heading back to college after church on Sunday. And so I thought, man, I'll be around. I'll be there. That's what I need. That's what I need. And so, yeah, I
came
hitched
home on a
that
Friday
ride.
and our time on Friday night, things kind of
at youth
shifted.
group, and Jeff is his name, the youth group leader. I give him every time I run into him, I thank him for this moment because this was a life-changing moment in my life. I went to youth group that night with you, Tara, and was in youth group, and I was so sad that entire night because I'm like, I got to go back. How am I going to get back? I got to somehow get myself in that car.
This was your home, your closest
Right.
thing to home you had.
And so I didn't want to do it, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, and I wasn't even talking to God about it because I thought I was such a disappointment. And so I wasn't even praying about it. I just was like, okay, I got to figure this out. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to have to just man up and do it. And after youth group that night, Jeff pulled me aside, and he asked me how I was doing. And I told him I was doing fine. And he looked at me and he said,
We're going to make it.
he goes, "No, you're not. No, you're not. You're not doing fine." And he could see, and he just looked right into me. And he said some of the most incredible things, something a parent would have said had I had a parent. And but Jeff said to me, basically, is summarizing it up, he says, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You have all this trauma in your life. You have all of these things that are happening, and you're finally in a place where you're growing. God is doing something in your life, and you're growing because you're feeling you're being loved. You're experiencing something that you should have
Community.
experienced, a community all along. Why are you in Minnesota?" And I just kind of fixed my look on him like,
because I have to. Or,
yeah, it's
right.
like, well, what else am I going to do? And I remember at the time someone else walked into the conversation, and I think I was emotional. So I think there was evidence of tears and those kinds of things as Jeff and I are talking, and just wanted to know if everything was okay. And so I just shared a little bit with him, and then Jeff shared with him, and this person said, yeah, but sometimes you have to man up. Sometimes you have to make
You dismiss your
the
girlfriend.
hard decision. And I'll never forget. And this person was being compassionate. It wasn't that he just didn't know the full story. But Jeff looked at him and goes, "No, this is different. This is different."
And that was so validating for you too,
Yes.
to go, this isn't just like, oh, I'm sad or I'm lonely. This is something that's way heavier than you understood.
So Jeff then asked me. He says, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "What can I do?"
Right.
And he said, "If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't go back." I said, "But I've got resources that have made this a reality, and I don't know, I can't get a refund.
Right,
I don't know
right.
how to do all this." And he says, "Man, whatever you spent on that is not worth what it's going to cost you if you go back." And he said, my car was not in good shape, which is why I wasn't in Minnesota. But he said, "I'll give you my car. Go get your stuff and bring it home." He said, "I wish I could go with you. My work schedule won't let me, but just grab a friend and go get your stuff and bring it home." And I said, "Yeah, but I got to somehow tell Tara, and I've got to somehow
everybody.
let her parents know that the party they threw for me was a waste." And so that night, but I immediately found relief. I immediately found relief. And so I went to your house. I told you first.
And I was like extremely like everything. I'm like, wait, I'm happy you're coming home, but wait, what about our plan? What about the pastor's wife? Like, and that's kind of like, this was our path that God had for us. I'm glad you're not gone anymore, but it was like a mind bender for me. Like, whoa.
Well, and I thought your parents were this is how I just had every scenario in my head, but I really thought your parents were going to restrict me from dating you at that point. I thought Joe has no future. He's walking away from the only future because there was no safety net.
Not that we saw, right? There was no safety net.
There was nothing else. And so, but your dad was so amazing. Your mom was amazing, but your dad was the one that I was most concerned about. And your dad, Tara's dad, I just put it on the record, was so amazing, so compassionate, and basically said, "Hey, God doesn't have to have college to get for God to work in your life. It doesn't have to be through college." And your dad sent all his kids to college.
Right.
So, I mean, this was a very high value for him. And to be able to say that to me, to say, "Well, you'll figure it out.
And
we'll get it figured out."
It was so awful. And I'll just share this part of the story for you because it shocked me too. It kept going like, but how do we do this? But there also were some very gracious, loving people on the staff at that school that when you kind of explained the extent of it, was able to give you like almost 100% refund minus the food you ate in the cafeteria.
Right.
And it was like, that was such a confirmation going, okay, that God's being gracious to you. It was all figured out. Cause like we read about that too, but to go that moment, that first person, that admissions office or whatever office it was that just had compassion to say, we understand this was a horrible mistake, you know?
Yeah.
So the hard part is that's like the end of the story, but really was the beginning of an extremely, extremely hard year. We were together in the same city, but that year you were floundering is the only word I can think of. It was a floundering year. Not only did you not necessarily have a path of what you were going to do with your life because you were doing whatever job someone hired you for, but you still were at a high level of depression most of that year. And it was just a new reality. The first year was like fun, dating. We got the whole lives in front of us. God's going to do great things. And this one, like that all kind of came to a crashing halt. And I know a lot of it was for you struggling with that sense of, I failed everybody. This was, people had hopes and dreams for me. And I've just told everybody that I can't.
Like, what do you do with the gift cards and money you were given at the party, right? To go away to school. Do you give that back and then it gets awkward? And so, I thought I had let everyone down. I thought I was a failure, but there was something much heavier at play. And that is all those things that were triggered and stirred up had to be dealt with. I wanted to just ignore them. I wanted to put it all back in the box. let's just pretend it never happened. Let's just pretend that I never made this decision. Let's go back to having ice cream on Saturday night and
Right.
we can just dream about our future. But that's not the way God works. And God doesn't cause us. I don't believe he caused that scenario in a sense, but I do believe that he works through those things. And so once that created an opportunity for me to find healing, God doesn't sit back. I believe that God is very much a part of our lives and wants that. And so I had a choice to make. And I mean, and on some level, Tara, I'm embarrassed to say that I did not make the healthiest of choices to lean into God. I kind of started to run from God to say, man, God's disappointed with me. Everyone around me is disappointed. Tara's disappointed. She's staying with me, but this is not good for the long haul. And so, yeah, the depression set in and I was becoming more and more hopeless, I think.
Well, and we mentioned that the community part was really important, to say you have a home church. And if you are ever at a place where you have that home church that's supportive, it really is worth your weight in gold. Like that, we know that. But I think we also fell into kind of just going like, oh, if that person says this is the right path. And I think, remember, this is another weird part of that story of you came home from college after been there a week and there was another Bible college that you could drive to in town to say, hey, maybe we go to this college and we can get you enrolled. I think you went there for one day.
I went and checked it out. I don't think
Whatever.
I actually
It was
went.
like, wait. Like I don't think,
Yeah.
but like we were floundering. Like, what are you going to do?
How am I going to become a pastor if I
Right.
can't even go to?
And so
right?
like, what am I going to do with my life? And so, again, this is 1990. So you're working at a video
93
store.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, people check out videos and you liked, videos, but we kind of knew that wasn't necessarily a career path, especially nowadays. Video
Yes.
stores,
They went away.
it wouldn't have been the best idea. But I think we did, now that we're on this side, way on the other side, what we learned about what God was doing in our lives, even in that very hard year, not having anything. Not
Well,
just
I think it
having
also
any plan.
took a strain on our, it really took a toll on our relationship because it's hard when you really think you've let someone down and you've disappointed them. And Tara, you were executing your plans. You were still getting
I
ready
had
for
my plan,
college and
yeah.
you were
And
still.
I had a home and a family and-
right. And I knew at any time you could close that door. And honestly, in my mind, and I'm not saying this is true, but in my mind, it wouldn't cost you anything to say, Joe, we're done.
Right.
You
I had
had
another
all of
plan I
this.
could fall back
Right.
on in a sense.
Where I really thought all those horrific things that were said about me were possibly true. I always believed they were true, but here in this instance, I was like, yeah, maybe I am worth nothing. Maybe they were right. Maybe they're, maybe I am just a disappointment or whatever. And so it wasn't, and I want to stress this, it wasn't that I was living in self-pity, because that's kind of what it can sound like. And there was a part of that. Absolutely. There was a part of that. But it was more that I was coming to grips. I was resolving myself to believe the lie. And that, I think that's even more dangerous than self-pity, because you start to lose that sense of hope, that sense of, okay, maybe God is in this. Maybe there is no hope, is kind of where I was. Unfortunately, it's where I was going. I really hate that that's what I was thinking, but that's where I was. And it was hurting our relationship.
So I have one more letter. This is from me. This is a couple weeks after you came home.
Okay.
And again, this is kind of like the bottom of like, wow, what are we doing here? And all I said, I had a lot of things to say, but we're picking a snippet because no one wants to hear 15 pages of my rambling. But I said, how about you? Are you okay? I know you have a lot to worry about. Hang in there, sweetie. I love you so much. Just don't give up on us, okay? I really, truly think the relationship is worth working at. You are worth fighting for. I'm sorry I've been very demanding, honey. I probably was. I don't mean to put so much pressure on you.
Well, you were still trying to figure out.
I was trying to get you a plan, honey.
Yes, right.
I was like, okay, plan A's out the door. What's the next plan? I don't like having not a plan. So I think I probably was putting some pressure on you, like, let's get a plan. Okay, so I said, it's just, I know I can count on you, and sometimes I need you to hold me. So also, I was emotional for my own end and just regular people stuff. I don't know why, but I am very drained lately. and not all here. It's just, this is a hard time for me. Please hang in there for me. So, even though this was your issue, I think it was hard on me as well. Like, and for me, it was coming to terms with like the stuff that you'd brought into marriage from trauma. Like, it was coming more to the surface.
And this
With
is
the first
in our
year, we
dating
kind of
years.
had like,
we're not married yet.
right? This
is our
is so
dating
much
years,
fun,
yeah.
and like, God's going so much through your story, and you've been through so much, and it's great. And it was almost like a reality check of a year, like, and again, you were struggling, and our relationship was much more strained in terms of our ability to connect. We didn't have a shared purpose. I was in community college doing my stuff. You were less engaged at church. I remember that being a big issue because so much of our first year of dating was being involved at church and the various things. That was a big part of our schedule. And I remember more and more, you not wanting to go to church, and that bugging me. And I'm like, you got to come to church. And it bugged me for so long until finally I'm not sure when this came to light. It might've been later to go, I don't want to go to church. That reminds me of
being a failure.
All those people who said, Joe, you're going to be great. You'll be a great pastor. And now here I am working at the video store with no future. So but that was the kind of conflict we had. Cause I knew, and I saw in you the ability that you would have in someone's life. So I was right about those things. We just were wrong about the path to get there. And we won't go into this next year, but that year was a hard year. Then it was the following year that little by little pieces began to slowly put together to the point that we made it. But I don't like thinking about that year because it was really hard, but it does make a sweetness to go, we did get through it together. We knew we were going to make it. I think it just refers to, for me, like, we knew God had a plan for our lives. We knew God had a plan for you. I knew we were going to make it. We just didn't know how. It was the how that we were stuck in. Like, we were going to make it, but how?
I had to literally come back to basics to say, okay, God, I had to, it was really an incredible revelation moment when I realized that I never even consulted God on going to college. I never even really asked him. I prayed as if, thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this. I'm going. And I realized I learned so much once I began to get out of the way of myself, get the self-pity out of the way to say, okay, all right, maybe I'm believing a lie here. Maybe I'm believing a lie. I need to get back. And that was, Tara, you were really instrumental in helping that. There were a couple other key people in my life at the time speaking truth into my life. And finally, I think when we started to see the light at the light through that, it was in this idea of, God, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Not sorry that I went to college and failed you, because that's what my thought process had been. I'm really sorry that I never consulted you on this. I got myself in way over my head. I don't know what to do now. There's no seemingly hope for my future. I can't work at a video store forever. I really want you to do things in me. I want people to know they're loved, and I want you to do that through me. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And when I came back to that complete surrender of saying, God, let's just start over. And yes, I'm willing to work at the healing. That was one of the harder things. Yes, I'm willing to work through this healing process. That's when I think we started to see the shift happen.
And it's hard because, again, the importance of seeking God and not pleasing man, right? And sometimes God works for people in our lives to say, yes, when someone says to you, I see a call in your life, that's a confirmation. But I think that we felt that pressure to want to overcome. And so we look back and kind of say, what happened that we got put on that path without really thinking what we're going to do? And obviously, Joe, to speed forward, we ended up in radio ministry, which was, again, God's provision for you and exactly where you wish to be. And all the things we saw in you are still there. They're just being implemented in a different setting. And that's what's cool about how God works. It's like, yes, we're right. God had a call in your life. It just looked a little different, but
I'm also 1,000% healthier person than I was too.
Yes.
In that healing process.
Now, I think the fun full circle moment for us, though, has been the past 5 years too, in that the company or the radio station that you worked for ended up being, absorbed by a different college in Minnesota. And this was only a few years ago, but a few years ago you went to the Twin Cities in winter and interviewed for your station manager job, which was mind blowing. And I thought to myself, the last time that you were in the Twin Cities, you were at rock bottom in your life. I mean, walking out of that dorm going, what? And here you are 25 years later, 25 years later, coming back to that same city, again, a different college, probably a few miles across town. Well, look where God brought you to the point where now you're interviewing with the president of a university.
Right.
And you're like, wait a minute, you don't understand my history with university. Last time it didn't work out so well. But just that faithfulness that God gave you, that bird's eye view 25 years later to say he had a plan. He knew where you were going. It wasn't what we thought it was.
That was a few miles off. But yes.
It's a weird twist of fate for us that your checks come from technically a university.
Right.
And you're like, okay, it's okay. God worked through you. And God worked through your weaknesses and through your strengths to bring us to where you are now. And I like being on this side of it. I'm not worrying about it, but
it is really amazing. And I think one of the things that I really learned through that season of my life is the healing process. Number one is never really ever done. Everything will be made right at some, it may not be this side of heaven, but we do know, because the Bible tells us, and I believe God's promises to be right and to be true when he talks about heaven and what that's going to be like, that everything will be made right. So I can hold on to that. But on this side of heaven, the healing process is a process and it does take time. And so there are seasons of our lives when things get hard again and the triggering happens from my past, and I'm beginning to recognize, and a lot of it comes back to that season, to go, wait a minute, God is, okay, he's wanting to do a work again in this healing process. And so when I said I'm 1,000% healthier than I was then, it is amazing. And back to what you said at the beginning of the first episode of this series, last episode, the first of this two-parter, how we got from there to here is absolutely mind-blowing. And God gets all. He did so much in that.
Well, and again, there's so much we've learned, and a lot of this we shared, throughout every episode. But especially for healing from trauma, not being too overconfident about that process. And I think you've had different times in your life, even the past 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, to go, I thought I thought I was going to be over this, or I thought maybe this wouldn't trigger me anymore. But to go, no, there's still times that we have to understand our own weaknesses to say this is still difficult. And I think in 1993, it was a way overconfidence, and B, the trigger was so super huge. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I just don't like walking by that restaurant. It's like, that was a massive thing you're putting yourself under, going, I didn't have the strength and the legs to withstand that kind of emotional pain. So I think it made you more realistic, right? To say, I have to know, what am I capable of handling? And it's hard to acknowledge that, because we think, okay, with Christ, I can do all things. I can just, and I think we kind of said, okay, but there might be some things that are really hard. But again, that's what that community came back around to say, hey, I can see this looks really, really hard for you. And I think even just knowing someone saw that was such a great point of healing.
I think too, I had to learn, and I think I've learned through this and I've learned this lesson over and over and over again, is that it's okay to say no. That I think I had so much to prove to all of these voices in my head.
Good voices
there, but also the traumatizing voices of the past of saying I wouldn't mount to anything, that I wouldn't be anything significant, and that I was worthless. I had so much in my mind, I think, to also prove against that, even as I got healthier. But I would say yes in circumstances that were triggering that I probably should have said no to.
And for the wrong reason.
And for the wrong reasons. And so as I've gotten later in life, it's been really cool how God has grown that muscle to be able to say, hey, I could do this and I think I'll be just fine. I think God's with it. But this could be a triggering moment. Or having a wonderful wife like you, Tara, to speak into my life to say, hey, you can do that whatever it is that you're thinking you should be doing. But just know that this is the price that you could have to pay. So just make sure that you seek God on it.
Right,
I think that's
the beginning.
Really
for sure.
Hear God's voice. And so I've been able to to evaluate certain circumstances and be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that, and that's okay. That doesn't make me extremely weak to say no.
So Joe, on the podcast a lot, we talk about the concept of saying, like, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to work out. And you're like, it won't work out. But I said back in 1993 that we were going to make it. So
We made it.
Was I right?
I mean, well, we're making it.
Was I right?
You and I we argue on this point.
always
Have
a
we made it?
process.
Have we made it, or are we making it? And I think
for us, the making it was we'll get married.
Yeah.
Like that was kind of make it. Like we'll get married and have a place to live, and you'll have a job. Like that was the bar.
yeah,
And we did make it. We got married.
We're gonna make it.
We had a place to live, and you had a job. And then bonus, God's blessed your job abundantly. He's just blessed our family with 4 children. So like abundantly above all that we could ask and imagine.
Yeah, God has been really, really good. And looking back in 93, if someone had told me this is where you'll be in 2025, I would have been like, I don't know who you are or who that person is, but I mean, it's so, I've learned too, I think, over the years to dream bigger too, to say that God will do these things, not that he owes us anything, because he doesn't, but not set my sights too low. I think back in like even after we got married, I'm like, hey, if we can afford a 1-bedroom apartment and we can have food in the fridge, we've made it. And so it is interesting how God, as he grows us and we allow him, this is the key, I think. And number one, we could talk all day about forgiveness. That's another episode. Forgiveness is a key. Without forgiveness, there's no way I'm here today, right? We're here. But I think also allowing God to work the healing out in our lives and trusting him even when it's hard. And I think there were many times, Tara, that I stalled out that healing process because I didn't trust God. I stalled it out. Like in 1993, I actually literally could have been further along, but God's timing and plan is so perfect. As we trust him, he tends to make up the difference.
God works through our mistakes. That's the thing. The thing is, even when we do make a quote unquote mistake, or we say, hey, we missed the ball there, God does work through it. Even when the process to get out of it takes some time, he never stops working. So we are going to make it, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep saying that.
But I wanted to take a moment at the end of this podcast. I know we're already a little longer than normal, but maybe you're listening to this podcast right now and you're in a season of crisis. You relate to a lot of the things that were said. Maybe you went through a season of crisis, but you never got into or received that healing. So it still triggers, it's still triggering. If you're there, number one, I want to encourage you, Tara and I want to encourage you that it's not hopeless. If God can do it for us, he can do it for anyone. So number one, it's not hopeless. It may not turn out the way you think it's going to turn out. It may not look exactly like you think it's going to look, but God's plan is better. This, for me, in 2025, when I look back over our lives and the things that God has done, it's way better than I could have done it on my own. Trusting God is huge. And if you want someone to pray for you or you just need someone to listen, please drop us a line. Tara, Tara, at BehindOurSmiles.com.
And to quote you, with God on our side, how can we lose?